Venezuela's human rights record was examined by the United Nations Human Rights Council Universal Periodic Review Working Group for the third time. Deputy Chairman of the Russian Senate said on Tuesday that the United States is plotting a provocation to push the Ukrainian government into a confrontation with Moscow on Donbass. The Economic Community of West African States said in a statement on Tuesday that Burkina Faso's ousted President Kabore resigned under threat, intimidation and pressure from the military. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Venezuela's human rights record was examined by the United Nations Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review Working Group for the third time on Tuesday in a meeting that was webcasted live. The Universal Periodic Review 40th session was originally scheduled to be held in November 2021, although it was postponed due to COVID-19 measures. The delegation of Venezuela was led by Delcy Rodriguez Gomez, the Vice President of the Bolivarian Republic, who referred to Venezuela's economical impairment facing COVID-19 because of a U.S. blockade and the smear campaign of Colombia on Venezuelan citizens, as well as the violent incursions of that nation on the common borderline territories with Venezuela. The three country representatives serving as rapporteurs for the review were Somalia, Indonesia, and Cuba. The Universal Periodic Review contained reports of independent rights experts and groups, human rights treaty bodies, and other UN entities.
Humanity still hasn't understood that either we move forward together to a solution, or we will continue to remain divided. Another thing, and against the global context, we have the third UPR. In addition to the inequality and the accumulation of wealth, we have seen an increase in violence over the past number of years. Is this the context within which we can see the enjoyment of human rights, not just in Venezuela, but in countries of the world which have been impacted by war and conflict? And one of the most serious problems that humanity is facing, of course, is the threat to the environment.
As part of her statements at the United Nations Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review, the Venezuelan Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, emphasized that the government's goal is always, of course, to uphold the human rights of the Venezuelan people.
To uphold the human rights of the Venezuelan people. Now we're talking about our country's heroic resistance, and today I must say that in these 5 years, since 2016 and 2022, Venezuela at the end of the last quarter of 2021 saw a growth in its GDP of 7.7%. This is a demonstration of our people's ability, of the belief that we are a good people, we're a peaceful people, and a generous people.
Now we'll move on to other topics. 2 sessions of Congress have started at the same time in Honduras, in 2 different places in the midst of tensions in Parliament, which led to the appointment of 2 presidents in that state institution in separate ceremonies. One of the sessions occurs virtually and the other one in person. On the one hand, Congressperson Luis Redondo was sworn in compliance with an agreement signed between the party Libertad y Refundación, El Libre, and other political parties, and Congressperson Jorge Calix was also appointed president of the Congress with a majority plus the support of 20 legislators from the Partido Libre, who were later expelled from this political organization after being accused of disobedience and treason. In Honduras, supporters of President-elect Xiomara Castro gathered in front of Congress in Tegucigalpa after Jorge Calix and Luis Redondo were named presidents of Congress by legislators in separate ceremonies. Since Saturday night, demonstrators have been gathering around the Congress headquarters in a vigil against corruption and in defense of democracy. On Sunday, 48 deputies elected Luis Redondo as the president of the Congress during a session held inside the hemicycle. Simultaneously, and in the country club on the outskirts of Tegucigalpa, 79 congresspersons elected Congressperson Jorge Calix as president of the parliament, who was dismissed from Liberty and Refundation Party. The conflict took place before the swearing-in ceremony of Xiomara Castro as president of the Central American nation. Supporters for the incoming president pointed out the destabilizing attempts led from abroad.
I believe that the United States has played the role of referee so that waters can be calm.
I think they have to come to a dialogue for the good of our country because we, the people, can't take it anymore.
Newly re-elected Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, announced major changes to her new cabinet this Monday, formed of 20 ministers. Not only has the cabinet been reduced, but the Barbadian Prime Minister declared a deputy Prime Minister as well as 4 senior ministers responsible for infrastructure, social and environmental policy, the productive sectors and governance. Addressing the nation on Monday evening, Motley stated that she will be retaining responsibility as Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, with responsibility for culture, security, public service, CARICOM and the development commissions. In addition to the announcement of her cabinet, the Prime Minister made a proposal which will require a constitutional amendment to allow an 18-year-old to serve as senator if it is accepted. Motley was sworn in for a second term last Thursday following her Barbados Labour Party's second landslide election victory, taking all 30 seats in Parliament.
Our new development agenda, which we titled in our manifesto, Our Barbados, Owning Our Future, is a transformative one, intended to build human and social capital and a sustainable economy in which the skills of all of our citizens and residents are recognized and utilized. It is the intention of this government again to engage with the opposition parties which contested the last 2 elections to determine how best they may participate in the appointment of 2 opposition senators provided for in our Constitution. I am equally awaiting a legal opinion from the Honorable Attorney General on this matter before we start those formal discussions with the opposition parties.
We'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the South. Vladimir Dusarabov, deputy chairman of the Russian Senate, said on Tuesday that the United States is plotting a provocation to push the Ukrainian government into a confrontation with Moscow in Donbass. In his opinion, Washington's steps, such as the evacuation of diplomatic personnel and their families, as well as the recommendations for its citizens not to travel to Ukraine, are aimed to provoke a crisis in the Eastern European nation. The Russian senator recalled that the Pentagon announced it will send more than 8,000 U.S. military personnel to Europe to strengthen the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Russia responded by moving troops within its territory near the Ukrainian border, which the West described as a step towards a possible invasion. The governments of Russia and China held joint naval exercises in the Arabian Sea to strengthen military cooperation. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, both countries rehearsed the liberation of a captured ship while carrying out tactical maneuvers and organizing the search of the captured ship. These military tactics were called Pacific Sea 2022, where they rehearsed the transfer of a wounded man by helicopter from a Russian ship to a Chinese one. On the part of Russia, the branch of the Pacific Fleet participated, consisting of 3 vessels called the cruiser Varyag, the anti-submarine ship Admiral Tributz, and the supply ship Boris Buduma, while the Chinese Navy sent the supply ship Tiahu to the exercises. The mayor of Italy's Lampedusa island, Toro Martello, reported that 7 people died while attempting the perilous Mediterranean crossing from Libya in a boat carrying 280 people in cold weather. The mayor stated that 3 of those people died during the crossing, another 4 suffered severe hypothermia and later were intercepted by the Coast Guard and were transferred to hospitals in the island. Hundreds of people have made the often deadly journey this year, despite winter weather that once deterred asylum seekers from attempting the crossing, and numbers are expected to rise further. The Mediterranean Hope Migration Project said that the people hailed originally from Bangladesh, Egypt, Mali, and Sudan. According to Italian media reports, the 7 dead were Bangladeshi. China's President Xi Jinping met with the head of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, as the country prepares to host the Winter Olympics. China, where the coronavirus first emerged, has maintained a strict zero-COVID policy that includes mass testing and snap lockdowns in response to the slightest hint of an outbreak. Most visitors from abroad must quarantine for multiple weeks, but different rules are in place for the Olympics. Participants will fly straight into a closed-loop bubble in Beijing and are not allowed to interact with the public. The Chinese head of state is expected to meet various world leaders and dignitaries during the Olympics. Despite being clouded by a diplomatic boycott from several Western countries, China hopes to make the next week's games a triumph. At least 19 people were killed during a gang clash that led to the burning of a nightclub in the Indonesian region of West Papua on Monday night. Police authorities reported that they found most of the bodies in the second floor of the nightlife venue in Sorong City. The clash between two rival groups began at the venue on Monday night, although they had been involved in other fights recently, and left at least one fatality stabbed to death before the fire broke out from second floor. Authorities have met with representatives of both gangs, in addition to requesting the collaboration of community and religious leaders in the region to prevent further violent incidents. Now we move on to other topics. The president of Peru, Pedro Castillo, promised fishermen affected by the oil spill in the central coast of the country that the government will make the Spanish company Repsol fulfill its responsibilities in the ecological disaster. The Peruvian head of state also said that this is not the first time that Repsol has done this to the country, in reference to another oil spill on Kabore Beach, also affected this time, which occurred in 2013. In this sense, Castillo announced that the government will seek to send more economic resources to the artisanal fishermen, who have stopped going out to sea since the spill occurred. On January 15th, there was an oil spill at sea from a ship that was unloading oil in the pipes of the Pampilla refinery, which is operated by Repsol and which over the days has spread more than 1.8 square kilometers of coastline and 7.1 square kilometers of sea.
On behalf of the government, we're going to make this company, which is responsible for the oil spill, comply with its criminal, civil, and administrative responsibilities.
2 people died and at least 52 others were injured as a result of the earthquake that affected southern Haiti, according to information provided by the country's Civil Protection Department. The report also detailed that 782 houses were destroyed or damaged, while 834 families were affected. Most of the injured were reported in the cities of Miraguan, capital of Nips, as well as Fond-de-Neps. The earthquake of 5.3 of the Open Richter scale has had an epicenter in the department of Nips, but was perceptible in regions such as the West, Southeast, Cape Haitian, and others with strong, moderate intensity.
Magnitud 7.
Now we address other topics. Cuba will seek the World Health Organization endorsement for its Soberano 2 and Soberano Plus anti-COVID vaccines by the end of January. These 2 formulas are added to the recognition process of the Abdala immunizer by the maximum sanitary organism of the world. This was stated at a press conference by the director of the Finlay Vaccine Institute, Vicente Perez, who assured that a meeting that had been held with the World Health Organization for this purpose. Veres also pointed out that the formula will be exposed to the most demanding analysis.
We are preparing to be ready by the end of this month. We've had a previous meeting with the World Health Organization and we are clear on what we need to cover. Everything that is usually not as demanding from our regulatory authorities, but they have now considered important, we are preparing that information to apply.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. The Economic Community of West African States said in a statement on Tuesday that Burkina Faso's ousted president, Kabore, resigned under threat, intimidation and pressure from the military. In his handwritten letter addressed to the new junta administration, Marc Christian Kabore wrote that after the events that took place since Sunday, he decided to resign from all his duties from the best interests of society. Mountainous soldiers declared a coup on Monday, announcing a series of measures, including the closure of the West African country's borders. Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, along with other members of the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, stated they have decided to put an end to the power of President Kabore due to the continuous deterioration of the security situation. And supporters of Burkina Faso's new ruling junta rallied on Tuesday as France and the United Nations condemned the West African country's latest coup. Officers detained President Marc Christian Kabore in the volatile state on Monday amid deepening anger at his handling of a jihadist insurgency. The country now lies in the hands of the Patriotic Movement for Preservation and Restoration, the name of a junta led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. On Monday night, a statement signed by Damiba announced the suspension of the constitution, the dissolution of the government and the parliament, and the closure of the country's borders from midnight.
I'm here this morning to support Damiba, to support him in his transition to life, because he has relieved me. I am tired of crying. Our villages are occupied. We have had thousands of displaced people. Too many of our soldiers have died, which is why the whole of Burkina has been crying, and finally Damiba has come to relieve us. We are very happy because the Burkina army has taken its responsibility. This is what we have been asking for a long time. They have assumed their responsibility and we are proud of them, and we will fight with them. If they have to go to the front, they can count on the youth of Burkina Faso. We are ready to defend our nation now.
At least 8 fans died and 38 people were injured in a stampede at the Yaoundé Olembe Stadium in Cameroon on Monday. According to a statement by the government, the incident occurred before the host country's round 16 in the Africa Cup Nations against Comoros. In a press release on Tuesday by Cameroon's state-run radio and television CRTV Communications Minister René Emmanuel Sadi said that 31 of the victims were slightly injured and 7 were in serious condition. The Syrian government on Tuesday called on the UN mechanisms and other international humanitarian agencies to increase aid to thousands of displaced families in the city of Hasakeh. Authorities in Damascus made a request during an emergency meeting at the Foreign Ministry. The meeting was attended by all organizations operating in Syria to learn about the humanitarian situation in Hasakeh. The executive attributed the crisis to multiple aggressions perpetrated by the terrorist group Daesh, in addition to the bombings by the U.S. forces and their allies. Official figures indicate that the climate of violence forced more than 1,500 families to leave their homes in the city of Hasakeh. And the northeastern Syrian province of Hasakeh has seen a mass exodus of thousands of citizens amidst harsh weather conditions. Damascus has described the situation as a humanitarian catastrophe and the result of the actions of the U.S. occupation forces and separatist militia on the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. Our correspondent, Hisham Wanus, has the story.
The clashes are taking place amid heavy bombings by fighter jets of the so-called international coalition led by Washington for the supposed fight against Daesh. in the Gura neighborhood of the provincial capital of Hasakeh, on the perimeter of the industrial high school converted by the pro-U.S. separatist militia, the Syrian Democratic Forces, into the Al-Sina prison, which houses more than 5,000 Daesh terrorists and which was taken over by the prisoners and from which dozens escaped.
The terrorists escape from this prison is a planned action by Washington and its separatist militia, which seeks to provide an excuse for the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces and the invading North American forces to provoke a demographic change in the service of U.S. divisive plans against Syria and to justify the illegal U.S. military presence in the oil-rich north of Syria under the pretext of pursuing and fighting terrorists.
The U.S. bombing raids that hit the Euphrates University grain silos and the Polytechnic Institute of Hasakeh under the pretext of hunting down fugitive terrorists from Al-Sina prison forced more than 2,600 families in the Geran neighborhood to leave their homes. The Syrian authorities and the Syrian Red Crescent Moon, they were housed in 3 temporary reception centers where they get all possible care amidst a notable absence of assistance from international humanitarian organizations.
In the face of the regrettable silence of the so-called world community that witnesses these deplorable actions in violation of the international legality and humanitarian law, besides remaining silent, international organizations do not provide assistance to displaced civilians, and that's why we condemn the fact that these international bodies submit to the will of the United States.
Damascus, in addition to deploying enormous efforts to stop this new spiral of violence, condemned the fact that the Daesh terrorists are carrying out instructions from the United States to implement their destabilizing policies in Syria. It also described the actions of the U.S. forces and the Syrian Democratic Forces militia as war crimes and crimes against humanity, and asked the UN Security Council for an immediate response to confront this new humanitarian catastrophe before it gets worse.
TeleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
Thank you, Hisham, for this report, and we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.